Emma Martinez stared at her laptop screen in the dim light of her dorm room, the harsh glow reflecting off her tear-stained cheeks. The email from the university registrar felt like a death sentence. Academic probation. Immediate action required. But it wasn't just any failing grade that had landed her here. It was Professor Diane Clark's Victorian literature course, and that cold, unforgiving F that seemed to mock her from the screen. She remembered the exact moment it all fell apart. 3 weeks ago, during her final presentation on Jane Eyre, Emma had stood frozen at the podium, Clark's piercing gray eyes boring into her soul. The words had died in her throat, her carefully prepared analysis crumbling under that intimidating stare. She'd stumbled through half-formed sentences about feminist themes and Gothic symbolism, watching Clark's expression grow more distant with each passing moment. Insufficient preparation and lack of critical analysis, Clark had written on her final paper.
If you enjoy the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe as that greatly helps the channel.
Your insights lack depth and your arguments are poorly supported. This work does not meet the standards expected at this institution. Now, as Emma scrolled through the summer session requirements, she felt her stomach drop. There was only one section of Victorian literature being offered during the summer intensive program. Professor D. Clark. 6 weeks, 3 days a week, one-on-one tutorials due to low enrollment. Emma closed her laptop and buried her face in her hands. 6 weeks alone with the woman who had systematically destroyed her confidence all semester. The woman whose sharp tongue had reduced her to tears more than once. The woman who, despite everything, still made Emma's heart race in ways she didn't fully understand. Meanwhile, 3 floors up in the English department, Professor Diane Clark sat in her office reviewing the summer enrollment lists. When she saw Emma's name, she paused, her fingers tightening around her red pen. She remembered the girl's final presentation all too well, not because it was poorly prepared, but because of the way Emma's voice had trembled, the way her hands had shaken as she tried to maintain composure under Diane's scrutiny. Diane had been teaching for 8 years, and she'd built her reputation on being demanding, uncompromising. Students feared her classes, but they also respected them. Her standards were high because she believed in pushing students to their potential. But with Emma, something had been different. Something that made Diane's chest tighten with guilt and confusion. She'd been too harsh, she knew that now. But Emma's passionate discussions during office hours, the way her green eyes lit up when she talked about Bronte's use of symbolism, the genuine love for literature that shone through despite her academic struggles, it had all affected Diane in ways she couldn't allow herself to acknowledge. The truth was, Emma Martinez was brilliant. Her insights were often more sophisticated than her graduate students, but her insecurities sabotaged her every time. And Diane's harsh critiques, meant to push Emma toward excellence, had instead pushed her toward failure. Diane picked up her phone and dialed the department head's extension. "Margaret, it's Diane. About the summer intensive program, I see we have a one-on-one tutorial situation." "Yes, Emma Martinez. Poor girl failed your Victorian Lit course. You'll be working with her exclusively for 6 weeks. I trust that won't be a problem." Diane's grip tightened on the phone. "No problem at all. I'll make sure she gets the attention she needs." After hanging up, Diane stared out her office window at the nearly empty campus. Summer session meant fewer distractions, quieter hallways, and long afternoons in empty classrooms. It also meant she'd be spending 18 hours over the next 6 weeks alone with the student who had been haunting her thoughts since the semester ended. The first day of summer session arrived with oppressive heat and humid air that made the old humanities building feel like a greenhouse. Emma arrived 15 minutes early, her chestnut hair pulled back in a nervous ponytail, clutching a worn copy of Jane Eyre and a notebook filled with color-coded annotations. She found classroom 204 empty except for the familiar figure behind the desk. Professor Clark looked up from her materials, and Emma felt that familiar flutter of anxiety mixed with something else she couldn't name. "You're early," Clark said, her voice carrying that same crisp authority that had intimidated Emma all semester. "I'm sorry, I can wait outside if you prefer." "Sit down, Emma." Clark's tone softened slightly. "We have a lot of work to do." Emma took a seat in the front row, the classroom feeling cavernous around them. The afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the empty desks. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. Before we begin, Clark said, setting down her pen and looking directly at Emma, I want to understand what happened during the regular semester. Your early assignment showed promise, but your confidence seemed to deteriorate as the weeks progressed. Emma's cheeks flushed. I don't know. I think I psyched myself out. Your standards are so high, and I kept feeling like I wasn't smart enough to be in your class. Something flickered across Clark's expression. Surprise, perhaps even regret. Intelligence was never the issue, Emma. You have insights that many of my graduate students would envy. The problem was your presentation and your confidence in defending your ideas. Really? Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Really? Clark stood and moved to the whiteboard. This summer isn't just about passing a class. It's about discovering your voice as a scholar. But that means you need to trust yourself, and you need to trust me to guide you rather than judge you. As Clark began outlining their summer curriculum, Emma found herself studying the professor's profile. She'd never noticed the way Clark's severe bun highlighted the elegant line of her neck, or how her typically harsh expression softened when she talked about literature. There was something almost vulnerable about Clark when she wasn't performing her role as the intimidating professor. We'll start with Jane Eyre, since that's where you struggled most, Clark was saying. But I want you to approach it differently this time. Instead of trying to impress me with complex analysis, I want you to tell me what the text makes you feel. Emma blinked in surprise. Feel. Great literature isn't just about academic analysis, Emma. It's about human connection. Jane Eyre speaks to readers because they see themselves in her struggles, her desires, her fears. What do you see when you read about Jane's relationship with Rochester? Emma hesitated, then took a breath. I see someone who's afraid of not being good enough. Someone who loves someone they think is beyond their reach. Clark's eyes met hers, and Emma felt something shift in the air between them. That's exactly right. Now, let's explore why Bronte chose to express that universal fear through Jane's specific circumstances. For the next hour, they discussed themes of social class, gender expectations, and the Gothic tradition. But Emma found herself increasingly distracted by the way Clark's voice became warmer when she spoke about the text, the way her gray eyes seemed to soften when Emma offered a particularly insightful observation. As the session ended, Clark gathered her materials with careful precision. Same time Wednesday. And Emma? Come prepared to argue with me. The best insights come from intellectual debate, not submission. Emma nodded, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. As she packed her things, she caught Clark watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Professor Clark? Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you agree to teach the summer intensive? I know it's extra work, and you could have recommended another professor. Clark paused, her hands stilling on her briefcase. Because I believe in your potential, Emma. And because I think I failed you during the regular semester. This is my chance to do better. The honesty in Clark's voice caught Emma off guard. She'd expected a professional, distant response. Instead, she saw something raw and genuine in the professor's expression. Thank you, Emma said quietly, for giving me another chance. We're giving each other another chance, Clark replied, and Emma felt her heart skip at the implication. That evening, Emma sat in her dorm room, staring at her Jane Eyre notes. But instead of focusing on Victorian social conventions, she found herself thinking about Clark's admission. The professor had failed her? How could someone so accomplished, so confident, feel like they'd failed? Meanwhile, Diane Clark sat in her apartment, grading papers and trying not to think about the way Emma's face had lit up when she'd finally relaxed into their discussion. She'd spent years maintaining professional boundaries, keeping her distance from students, never allowing herself to see them as anything more than minds to be shaped and challenged. But Emma Martinez was different. She was 23, technically an adult and graduate school bound. She was brilliant and passionate and vulnerable in ways that made Diane want to protect her rather than challenge her. And that was exactly the problem. Diane had been married once, briefly, to a fellow academic who'd found her too demanding, too cold. Since then, she'd dated occasionally, but never seriously. Her career had been her focus, her reputation her shield. She'd never felt the kind of connection with anyone that she was beginning to feel with Emma. She closed her laptop and poured herself a glass of wine. 6 weeks. She just had to maintain her professionalism for 6 weeks. After that, Emma would move on to graduate school, and Diane could return to her carefully controlled existence. But even as she made this resolution, Diane knew she was lying to herself. The damage was already done. Emma Martinez had gotten under her skin in ways that had nothing to do with academics. Wednesday's session began with a discussion of Jane Eyre's childhood at Gateshead Hall. Emma had prepared extensively, filling pages with notes about Gothic symbolism and feminist themes. But when she started to present her analysis, Clark interrupted her. "Stop," Clark said gently. "You're doing it again. You're trying to impress me instead of engaging with the text. Tell me about Jane's relationship with her cousin John Reed. What does their dynamic remind you of?" Emma set down her notes, frustrated. "I don't understand what you want from me. I want you to be honest. Not academic, honest. What does John Reed represent to Jane?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at the open book. "He represents everyone who's ever made her feel small. Everyone who's ever used their power to make her feel worthless." And how does Jane respond to him? She fights back. Even though she knows she'll be punished for it, she fights back because she refuses to accept that she's less than human. Clark smiled, the first genuine smile Emma had seen from her. "Exactly. And that's what makes Jane Eyre revolutionary. She refuses to accept society's definition of her worth." Now, how does that connect to her relationship with Rochester? As they continued their discussion, Emma felt herself relaxing. Without the pressure of formal presentation, she found herself speaking more freely, making connections she'd never seen before. And Clark seemed different too, less intimidating, more collaborative. "You know," Emma said during a pause in their conversation, "I've never had a teacher who made me feel like my thoughts mattered before." Clark's expression grew serious. "Your thoughts do matter, Emma. They always have. I'm sorry if I made you feel otherwise during the regular semester." "Why were you so harsh?" Emma asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude." "No, it's a fair question." Clark was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I saw potential in you that you didn't see in yourself. I thought if I pushed you hard enough, you'd rise to meet my expectations. Instead, I undermined your confidence. It was a failure of judgment on my part." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. "I thought you just didn't like me." "Quite the opposite," Clark said softly, then seemed to realize what she'd admitted. She quickly looked away, busying herself with her papers. "We should move on to the next chapter." But Emma had caught something in Clark's tone, something that made her pulse quicken. She studied the professor's profile, noting the slight flush on her cheeks, the way her hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she turned the pages of her book. "Professor Clark?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes. What's your first name?" Clark looked up, surprised by the question.
"Diane."
"Why?" "It's just, we've been working together for a week, and I realized I don't even know your first name. It makes you seem more human, I guess." Diane. Emma tried the name in her mind, smiled slightly. "I suppose I can seem rather intimidating." "A little," Emma admitted. "But less so now. You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Emma hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Someone cold. Someone who didn't care about students as people." "But you do care, don't you?" "Maybe too much." The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to acknowledge. Diane's careful composure cracked slightly, and Emma saw something vulnerable in her expression. "I care about your education," Diane said carefully. "I care about your future." "Just my education?" The question slipped out before Emma could stop it, and she immediately felt her face burn with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have."
"Emma."
Diane's voice was gentle but firm. "We should focus on Jane Eyre." But as they returned to their discussion, both women found it difficult to concentrate. The air between them had shifted, charged with an undercurrent of attraction that neither could ignore, even as they both knew they should. As the session ended, Diane found herself reluctant to let Emma leave. She'd been looking forward to their meetings all week, had found herself thinking about Emma's insights and questions long after their sessions ended. "I'll see you Friday," Emma said, packing her things. "Friday," Diane confirmed, watching as Emma headed for the door. "Diane?" Emma turned back, and Diane's heart skipped at the use of her first name. Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. After Emma left, Diane sat alone in the empty classroom, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. She was in trouble, and she knew it. Every professional instinct told her to maintain her distance, to keep their relationship strictly academic. But every time Emma looked at her with those soft green eyes, every time she smiled when she understood a concept, every time she said Diane's name with that hint of intimacy, Diane felt her resolve weakening. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at Margaret's number. She could call the department head, explain that she wasn't the right fit for the summer intensive, recommend another professor. It would be the safe choice, the professional choice. But as she stared at the phone, she thought about Emma's face when she'd admitted to feeling worthless, about the way she'd lit up when she'd finally found her voice in discussing Jane Eyre. Emma needed this chance, needed someone who believed in her potential. Diane put the phone away. She was a professional. She could handle 6 weeks of one-on-one tutorials without compromising her ethics or her career. She just had to be more careful about maintaining boundaries. But even as she made this decision, she knew she was already lost. Friday's session took place in the library instead of the classroom. Diane had suggested the change of venue, hoping the more public setting would help maintain the professional distance she was struggling to keep. They sat at a corner table in the rare books section, surrounded by the quiet whispers of summer students and the soft rustle of turning pages. Emma had dressed differently. Instead of her usual jeans and t-shirt, she wore a sundress that brought out the green in her eyes. Diane tried not to notice, tried to focus on their discussion of Jane's time at Lowood School, but found herself distracted by the way the afternoon light caught the gold highlights in Emma's chestnut hair. The way Bronte describes the conditions at Lowood, Emma was saying, it's almost like she's comparing it to a prison. But for Jane, it's actually a step up from Gateshead because at least she's not actively despised. That's an excellent observation, Diane said, meaning it. What does that tell us about Jane's expectations? About how she's learned to value herself. She's learned to accept crumbs, Emma said, her voice growing more confident. She's so used to being treated badly that basic human decency feels like kindness. It's heartbreaking, really. Diane nodded, struck by the emotional intelligence in Emma's analysis. And how does that connect to her relationship with Helen Burns? Emma's face grew thoughtful. Helen represents everything Jane isn't: patient, forgiving, willing to accept injustice. But Jane can't be like Helen. She can't just accept suffering as God's will. Why not? Because she's too alive, too passionate. Helen's spirituality is beautiful, but it's also passive. Jane needs to fight for her dignity, even if it means fighting alone. Diane felt a chill of recognition. You identify with Jane. It wasn't a question, and Emma didn't treat it like one. I think anyone who's ever felt like they don't belong, who's ever been told they're not good enough, identifies with Jane. She's fighting for the right to be seen as fully human. And when she meets Rochester, Emma's cheeks flushed slightly. She meets someone who sees her as an equal, at least intellectually. Someone who challenges her, but doesn't try to diminish her. But she's also terrified because she's never been valued like that before. The parallel hit Diane like a physical blow. Emma was describing their own dynamic, perhaps without even realizing it. The way Emma had been diminished by previous experiences, the way she'd responded to being challenged but supported, the way she seemed to blossom under positive attention. Diane. Emma's voice was soft, concerned. Are you okay? You look pale. The use of her first name in public made Diane's pulse quicken. She glanced around to see if anyone had heard, but the library was nearly empty in the late afternoon. I'm fine, Diane said, but her voice was unsteady. Let's continue. As they discussed Jane's developing relationship with Rochester, Diane found herself caught between professional duty and personal desire. Emma's insights were becoming more sophisticated, her confidence growing with each session. But more than that, Diane was beginning to see Emma as more than just a student. She was seeing her as a brilliant, passionate woman who made her feel alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. The thing about Rochester, Emma was saying, is that he's not traditionally handsome or charming. But he connects with Jane on an intellectual and emotional level that she's never experienced before. He makes her feel seen. And what does Jane offer him? Emma considered this carefully. Honesty. Integrity. She refuses to let him hide behind his wealth and status. She challenges him to be better than he thinks he is. Diane felt her breath catch. That's a very mature understanding of love. Is it love, though? Emma asked. Or is it something else? Need, maybe? The way they fill each other's empty spaces. What do you think? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook. I think maybe love is need sometimes. The need to be understood, to be valued, to be seen as fully human. Maybe that's not the romantic ideal, but it might be more honest. Diane found herself leaning forward, drawn by the thoughtfulness in Emma's voice. You don't believe in romantic love? I believe in connection, Emma said, looking up to meet Diane's eyes. I believe in finding someone who sees you clearly and chooses to stay anyway. Someone who makes you want to be better than you are. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Diane felt as though Emma was speaking directly to her, describing exactly what she'd been feeling these past few weeks. That's very wise, Diane said softly. Is it? Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't have much experience with love. I've been too busy trying to prove I'm worth something to let anyone get close enough to matter. You are worth something, Diane said, her professional boundaries crumbling. You're worth everything. Emma's eyes widened at the intensity in Diane's voice. Diane, we should go. Diane stood abruptly, gathering her materials with shaking hands. It's getting late. As they packed up their things, Emma reached out and touched Diane's arm. Did I say something wrong? Diane looked down at Emma's hand on her arm, felt the warmth of the contact spreading through her body. No, she said quietly. You said something right. That's the problem. Emma's hand lingered for a moment before she pulled it away. I don't understand. I know, Diane said, meeting her eyes. Maybe that's for the best. But as they walked out of the library together, neither woman could shake the feeling that they were approaching a line they wouldn't be able to uncross once they stepped over it. That weekend, Emma found herself unable to focus on anything but her conversations with Diane. She replayed their interactions obsessively, analyzing every word, every look, every moment of connection. The way Diane had said, "You're worth everything," kept echoing in her mind, the intensity in her voice unlike anything Emma had ever heard from her. She tried to tell herself she was reading too much into it, that Diane was just being supportive in a professional capacity. But the memory of Diane's fingers trembling as she packed her books, the way she looked at Emma like she was fighting some internal battle, it all suggested something deeper than professional concern. Emma had dated in college, but never seriously. She'd always been too focused on her studies, too insecure about her own worth to believe anyone could really want her. But with Diane, she felt different.
Seen.
Valued. And if she was honest with herself, attracted in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. She'd never been attracted to a professor before, had never even considered the possibility. But Diane wasn't just any professor. She was brilliant and passionate and beautiful in a way that took Emma's breath away. And more than that, she made Emma feel like the best version of herself. Meanwhile, Diane spent the weekend pacing her apartment, trying to convince herself that she was imagining the connection she felt with Emma. She'd always been able to compartmentalize her emotions, to maintain professional boundaries even when she found students attractive or engaging. But Emma was different. Emma made her feel things she'd never allowed herself to feel. On Sunday evening, Diane finally called her best friend Sarah, a professor at another university who'd been her confidant through graduate school and beyond. I think I'm in trouble, Diane said without preamble when Sarah answered. What kind of trouble? The kind that could ruin my career. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Student.
Yes.
But it's not what you think. I haven't done anything inappropriate. I haven't even acknowledged what I'm feeling. But Sarah, I can't stop thinking about her. How old? 23. Graduate school bound.
Brilliant.
And I think she might feel it too. Diane, you know you can't. I know, Diane interrupted. I know all the reasons why this is impossible. But I've never felt this way about anyone before. Ever. And she's not just any student. She's special. They're all special when you're attracted to them. No, Diane said firmly. This is different. She challenges me, makes me think differently about everything. She's passionate and insightful and vulnerable in ways that make me want to protect her and push her at the same time. Sarah sighed. How much longer do you have to work with her? 4 more weeks. Can you maintain your professionalism for 4 more weeks? Diane was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I thought I could, but every time I'm with her, it gets harder. She looks at me like she sees something in me that I didn't know existed. Diane, listen to me. Whatever you're feeling, whatever she might be feeling, you cannot act on it while she's your student. You know that, right? Your career, your reputation, everything you've worked for, it would all be gone. I know, Diane said quietly. But what if this is real? What if this is the connection I've been looking for my whole life? Then you wait. You finish the summer session, she goes to graduate school, and maybe in a year or 2, when she's no longer your student, you can explore it.
But not now.
Not while you have power over her academic future. Diane knew Sarah was right, but the thought of waiting indefinitely, of possibly losing Emma to distance and time, made her chest tight with panic. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. You can, Sarah said firmly, because you're stronger than your feelings, and because you care about her too much to risk her future along with your own. After hanging up, Diane sat in her darkened apartment, staring out at the city lights. For more weeks. She just had to maintain her professionalism for 4 more weeks. Then Emma would be gone, and Diane could return to her carefully controlled life. But even as she made this resolution, she knew it was too late. Emma Martinez had already changed her irrevocably, and there was no going back to the person she'd been before. Monday's session began with palpable tension. Both women seemed to be struggling with the weight of unspoken feelings, their usual easy rapport replaced by careful politeness. They were discussing Jane's departure from Thornfield, and the parallel to their own situation wasn't lost on either of them. Jane leaves because she refuses to compromise her principles, Emma was saying, her voice steady despite the emotional undercurrent. She loves Rochester, but she won't stay with him under circumstances that would diminish her self-respect. And you agree with her decision? Diane asked, her voice carefully neutral. I think it's the only decision she could make and still be true to herself, Emma replied. Love isn't worth sacrificing your integrity for. Diane felt the words like a physical blow. Even when the circumstances are beyond anyone's control. When society's rules seem arbitrary and cruel. Emma looked up from her book, meeting Diane's eyes directly. Especially then. Because if you compromise your principles once, it becomes easier to compromise them again. And eventually, you lose yourself entirely. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Diane found herself wondering if Emma was talking about Jane Eyre or about them. Of course, Emma continued, her voice softer now. Jane's story doesn't end there. She finds her own way, becomes her own person, and when she reunites with Rochester, it's as an equal. Maybe that's the real message, that love worth having is worth waiting for. Diane's breath caught. Worth waiting for? Emma's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. Don't you think so? That sometimes the best things come to those who wait for the right moment, the right circumstances. I do, Diane said quietly. But waiting is difficult when you're not sure if the other person understands what you're waiting for. Emma's pulse quickened. They were no longer talking about Jane Eyre, and they both knew it. I think, Emma said carefully, that sometimes understanding exists even when it can't be spoken. Sometimes people connect in ways that transcend words. And sometimes, Diane added, her voice barely above a whisper, that connection is the most dangerous thing of all. They stared at each other across the table, the weight of their unspoken feelings almost unbearable. Emma felt her heart racing, saw the same struggle reflected in Diane's eyes. We should focus on the text, Diane said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, Emma agreed, but neither of them looked away. It was Emma who finally broke the spell, looking down at her book with shaking hands. Jane's time at Moore House, she said, her voice unsteady. She finds family there, people who value her for who she is. And discovers her own worth, Diane added, grateful for the return to safer ground, even as her heart continued to race. As they continued their discussion, both women struggled to maintain their focus. The air between them was charged with tension, with the weight of feelings they couldn't express. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every moment of connection felt loaded with possibility and danger. When the session ended, Emma lingered, seemingly reluctant to leave. "Diane," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever wonder what would happen if circumstances were different? If we'd met under different conditions?" Diane felt her careful composure cracking. "Emma, we can't." "I know we can't," Emma interrupted. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just asking if you wonder." Diane looked at Emma's face, saw the vulnerability there, the hope mixed with fear. "Every day," she admitted. "I wonder every day." Emma's breath caught. "So, do I." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their mutual confession hanging between them. Then Diane stepped back, her professional instincts finally kicking in. "I should go," she said, gathering her materials with careful precision. "Diane, wait." Emma reached out, her fingers brushing Diane's hand. "I need you to know that whatever happens these weeks with you, they've changed me. You've changed me." Diane looked down at their hands, at the point where Emma's fingers touched hers. "You've changed me too," she said quietly. "More than you know." Emma squeezed her hand gently, then let go. "I'll see you Wednesday." "Wednesday," Diane confirmed, watching as Emma gathered her things and headed for the door. After Emma left, Diane sat alone in the empty classroom, her hand still tingling from Emma's touch. She was in freefall now, all her carefully constructed defenses crumbling around her. For more weeks had suddenly become an eternity. That evening, Emma called her best friend from college, needing someone to talk to about the confusion and intensity of her feelings. "I think I'm falling in love with my professor," she said without preamble when Jessica answered.
Okay, wow.
"Hello to you too. And which professor are we talking about?" "The one I'm retaking Victorian Lit with." "Professor Clark." "Diane." Emma felt a thrill saying the name out loud. "The ice queen who failed you?" "Emma, are you sure you're not just transferring your academic anxieties into romantic feelings?" "I thought that too, at first. But Jess, she's not what I thought she was. She's brilliant and passionate and vulnerable in ways that take my breath away. And I think she feels something too. Even if she does, you know how complicated this is, right? Teacher-student relationships are." "I know," Emma interrupted. "I know all the reasons why it's impossible. But I've never felt this way about anyone before. She makes me feel like I'm worth something, like my thoughts and feelings matter." "That's what good teachers do, Em. It doesn't necessarily mean." "It's more than that," Emma said firmly. "The way she looks at me, the way her voice changes when she says my name, the way she admitted she wonders what would happen if circumstances were different. This isn't just good teaching, Jess. This is something else." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I can't do anything while she's my professor. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. But after the summer session ends, you're going to graduate school in the fall. 300 miles away." "I know. But maybe some things are worth the complications." Meanwhile, Diane was having a similar conversation with Sarah, who had called to check on her after their previous discussion. "It's getting worse," Diane admitted. "The connection, the tension, the way she looks at me. Today she asked me if I ever wonder what would happen if circumstances were different." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I wonder every day. Sarah, I think I'm in love with her." "Diane, you need to be very careful here. Even if she feels the same way, even if this is real, you cannot act on it while she's your student. One complaint to the administration, one rumor, and your career is over." "I know. But what if I'm throwing away my chance at real happiness because of arbitrary rules?" "They're not arbitrary, and you know it. The power dynamic, the potential for exploitation, these rules exist for good reasons." "But what about after? When the summer session ends and she's no longer my student?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "She's going to graduate school, isn't she? Moving away."
Yes.
300 miles. Long-distance relationships are hard under the best circumstances. Add in the age difference, the professional complications, the fact that she's just starting her career while you're established in yours. "I know all the practical reasons why it won't work," Diane interrupted. "But I can't stop thinking about the possibility that it might. Then you need to decide what you're willing to risk for that possibility. Because if you pursue this, you're not just risking your career. You're risking hers too. After hanging up, Diane sat in her living room, staring at the Jane Eyre novel on her coffee table. The parallels to her own situation were almost too painful to bear. Like Jane, she was faced with a choice between following her heart and maintaining her integrity. Like Jane, she was in love with someone society said was forbidden to her. But unlike Jane, Diane wasn't sure she was strong enough to make the right choice. Wednesday's session took place in Diane's office instead of the classroom. She'd made the change hoping that her professional environment would help her maintain boundaries, but the intimate setting had the opposite effect. With the door closed and the afternoon sun streaming through her window, the small space felt charged with possibility. Emma sat across from Diane's desk, discussing Jane's inheritance and newfound independence. But both women found it difficult to concentrate on the text when they were so acutely aware of each other's presence. Jane's inheritance changes everything, Emma was saying. Suddenly, she has the power to make her own choices, to be with Rochester as an equal rather than as a dependent. Do you think money is what makes them equals? Diane asked, genuinely curious about Emma's perspective. I know, Emma interrupted. I know all the reasons why it's impossible. But I've never felt this way about anyone before. She makes me feel like I'm worth something, like my thoughts and feelings matter. That's what good teachers do, Em. It doesn't necessarily mean. It's more than that, Emma said firmly. The way she looks at me, the way her voice changes when she says my name, the way she admitted she wonders what would happen if circumstances were different.
This isn't just good teaching, Jess.
This is something else. Jessica was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I don't know. I can't do anything while she's my professor. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. But after the summer session ends, you're going to graduate school in the fall. 300 miles away. I know. But maybe some things are worth the complications. Meanwhile, Diane was having a similar conversation with Sarah, who had called to check on her after their previous discussion. It's getting worse, Diane admitted. The connection, the tension, the way she looks at me. Today she asked me if I ever wonder what would happen if circumstances were different. What did you tell her? The truth. That I wonder every day. Sarah, I think I'm in love with her. Diane, you need to be very careful here. Even if she feels the same way, even if this is real, you cannot act on it while she's your student. One complaint to the administration, one rumor, and your career is over. I know. But what if I'm throwing away my chance at real happiness because of arbitrary rules? They're not arbitrary, and you know it. The power dynamic, the potential for exploitation, these rules exist for good reasons. But what about after? When the summer session ends and she's no longer my student? Sarah was quiet for a moment. She's going to graduate school, isn't she? Moving away.
Yes.
300 miles. Long-distance relationships are hard under the best circumstances. Add in the age difference, the professional complications, the fact that she's just starting her career while you're established in yours. I know all the practical reasons why it won't work, Diane interrupted. But I can't stop thinking about the possibility that it might. Then you need to decide what you're willing to risk for that possibility. Because if you pursue this, you're not just risking your career. You're risking hers too. After hanging up, Diane sat in her living room, staring at the Jane Eyre novel on her coffee table. The parallels to her own situation were almost too painful to bear. Like Jane, she was faced with a choice between following her heart and maintaining her integrity. Like Jane, she was in love with someone society said was forbidden to her. But unlike Jane, Diane wasn't sure she was strong enough to make the right choice. Wednesday's session took place in Diane's office instead of the classroom. She'd made the change hoping that her professional environment would help her maintain boundaries, but the intimate setting had the opposite effect. With the door closed and the afternoon sun streaming through her window, the small space felt charged with possibility. Emma sat across from Diane's desk, discussing Jane's inheritance and newfound independence. But both women found it difficult to concentrate on the text when they were so acutely aware of each other's presence. Jane's inheritance changes everything, Emma was saying. Suddenly, she has the power to make her own choices, to be with Rochester as an equal rather than as a dependent. Do you think money is what makes them equals? Diane asked, genuinely curious about Emma's perspective. Not money exactly, but what it represents. Autonomy. It's not about the wealth itself, but the freedom it gives her. She doesn't need Rochester anymore. She chooses him, and that makes their eventual union so much stronger. It's not about escaping poverty or finding a protector. It's about two independent people choosing to build a life together. Diane leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. That's a very nuanced reading, Emma. You're seeing the underlying principle, not just the surface plot point. Emma felt a thrill at the praise, but it was more than just academic satisfaction. It was the way Diane looked at her when she said it, the genuine admiration in her eyes. It just feels more real that way. That Jane isn't rescued, but chooses her path. Indeed. Diane's gaze lingered on Emma for a moment too long. And that's often the hardest choice, isn't it? To choose freedom, even when it means walking away from comfort or expectation. The unspoken parallel hung in the air. Both knew they were talking about more than Jane Eyre. The remaining weeks of the summer session passed in a blur of intense study and unspoken longing. Emma's confidence soared. Her papers were insightful, her arguments sharp, and her ability to articulate her ideas was now effortless. Diane, in turn, found herself letting her guard down more and more. Their sessions became less like professor-student tutorials and more like conversations between two intellectual equals, two kindred spirits. They talked about books, about life, about the hidden meanings in everything. The date of Emma's final presentation arrived, hanging over them like a looming shadow. It was the last hurdle, the point where their professional relationship would officially end. Emma had chosen a bold topic, one that felt deeply personal. Rewriting endings, the subversive power of revision in Victorian literature. On the morning of the presentation, Emma was a bundle of nerves. Not about the material, which she knew cold, but about the implications. She had carefully crafted her presentation to be a subtle, yet undeniable, message to Diane. She arrived at the classroom to find Diane already there, looking more formal than usual in a tailored suit, her hair pulled back in a severe but elegant bun. The sight of her tightened Emma's stomach with a mix of anxiety and affection. "Ready?" Diane asked, her voice softer than usual. "As I'll ever be," Emma replied, her heart thudding. She noticed the small, almost imperceptible tremor in Diane's hand as she adjusted her notes. Just as Emma was about to set up her laptop, the classroom door opened again. Professor Margaret Sterling, the department head, walked in, followed by a distinguished-looking man Emma didn't recognize. Margaret Sterling was a formidable woman, sharp-eyed and known for her meticulous oversight. "Diane, good morning," Margaret said, her voice brisk. "I hope you don't mind. Dr. Henderson here, from the dean's office, was interested in observing one of our summer intensive success stories. I told him about Ms. Martinez's remarkable turnaround." Emma's blood ran cold. The stakes had just multiplied tenfold. She risked not just failing, but public humiliation. And Diane risked everything. Diane's face remained a carefully neutral mask, but Emma saw her jaw clench almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Margaret. Please, make yourselves comfortable." She gave Emma a brief, reassuring glance. Emma took a deep breath, her carefully planned presentation suddenly feeling like a tightrope walk over a chasm. She launched into her topic, her voice surprisingly steady. "Good morning, Professor Clark, Professor Sterling, Dr. Henderson," Emma began, addressing them all. "My presentation today explores the concept of rewriting endings in Victorian literature. We often view original narratives as sacrosanct, but I argue that some stories, like life, deserve second chances. That revision isn't failure, but evolution." She discussed how minor characters could be given new, empowering narratives if viewed through a different lens, how authors sometimes penned multiple endings, and how modern interpretations often subverted original conclusions to give characters more agency. She spoke with a newfound passion and clarity, her voice resonating with conviction. "Take Jane Eyre," Emma continued, her gaze subtly finding Diane's. "Jane's return to Rochester in the end is often seen as a reunion of equals. But what if we consider it not as a foregone conclusion, but as a deliberate choice? A rewriting of the initial, impossible circumstances into a sustainable, mutually respectful partnership. It's about two people, once bound by societal constraints and personal wounds, actively choosing to author their own happy ending rather than just accepting the one given to them. Emma spoke for 20 minutes, her arguments sharp, her insights profound. She quoted passages, offered counterarguments, and presented a compelling case for the power of revision. When she finished, the room was silent. Margaret Sterling was the first to speak. "Ms. Martinez, that was exceptional. Truly remarkable. Your understanding of the material, your critical analysis, it's a stark contrast to your performance last semester. Professor Clark, your mentorship appears to have been nothing short of miraculous." Her tone was polite, but there was an unmistakable undertone of skepticism, a hint that she suspected something more than just academic guidance. Diane's eyes met Emma's across the room, a silent understanding passing between them. This was the moment. "I agree completely, Margaret," Diane said, her voice calm and steady, betraying no hint of the storm raging within her. "Emma's growth this summer has been extraordinary." She turned to Emma. "Emma, Dr. Henderson and I were discussing your remarkable improvement. Could you elaborate on what specifically clicked for you this summer? What was the revision in your own approach?" Emma understood. Diane was giving her a chance to defend herself, but more importantly, Diane was defending her, subtly deflecting Margaret's unspoken accusation. Emma took a breath, her gaze firmly on Diane. "Professor Clark helped me understand that true analysis isn't about memorizing facts or mimicking others' interpretations. It's about finding my own voice. She taught me that sometimes, to truly understand a story, you have to stop trying to be correct and start being honest about what the text makes you feel, what it makes you think." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Professor Clark taught me that a rewrite isn't a sign of failure, but a sign of growth. That sometimes, a story needs to be taken apart and put back together differently to reveal its true meaning. And that applies to more than just books." Emma's eyes held Diane's, a powerful, unspoken message passing between them. "She taught me to trust my own insights, even when they challenged the established narrative. And that," Emma finished, her voice clear and strong, "has made all the difference." Margaret Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly, but Diane Clark simply nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile gracing her lips. The unspoken message had been delivered, understood, and defended. Months later, autumn had fully arrived, painting the campus in hues of fiery red and gold. The air was crisp, students bustled in the hallways, and the humanities building, once a suffocating greenhouse, now felt alive and vibrant. In her usually severe office, Diane Clark was smiling. A framed photo sat on her desk, a candid shot of her and Emma, taken at a department picnic, both genuinely laughing. Emma's new office, a small, cozy space adjacent to Diane's, was filled with stacks of books and a perpetually steaming mug of herbal tea. Emma Martinez was now a first-year PhD student in the English department and officially Diane Clark's graduate assistant. The ethical lines were clear. Emma was no longer Diane's student in a graded capacity, and their professional relationship was defined by mentorship and collaboration, not assessment. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been whispered rumors, curious glances. But Diane, with a newfound openness and an undeniable confidence, had navigated it with grace and firmness. She had publicly championed Emma's brilliance, ensuring her admission to the graduate program was solely on merit. And Emma, with her quiet strength and undeniable talent, had quickly proven herself indispensable. It was late afternoon. Diane was reviewing a grant proposal when she heard a soft knock on her open office door. "Professor Clark?" Emma stood there, holding a stack of essays. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and her green eyes sparkled with warmth. She looked confident, at ease, completely transformed from the nervous girl who had stumbled through a presentation just months ago. "Emma," Diane replied, her voice softening automatically. The formality of Professor Clark and Emma was a playful remnant, a subtle nod to their past, but the warmth in their eyes, the easy comfort in their shared space, spoke volumes. Emma stepped inside, placing the essays on Diane's desk. "These are graded. And I had an idea for that article you're working on about subversive female narratives in late Victorian serials." Diane pushed her chair back, inviting Emma to sit.
Oh, do tell.
Emma launched into her idea, her passion for literature radiating from her. Diane listened, captivated, not just by Emma's intellect, but by the sheer joy she brought to their discussions. When Emma finished, Diane reached across the desk, gently taking Emma's hand. The touch was familiar, electric, yet now utterly unburdened by fear or professional boundaries. Their fingers intertwined naturally. "That's brilliant, Emma," Diane said, her voice a low murmur. "Absolutely brilliant." Emma's cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull away. "You think so?" "I know so." Diane's gaze held Emma's, her gray eyes, once so intimidating, now filled with a deep, open affection. "You know, when you first came into my class, I thought I knew exactly how your story would end. I thought I knew exactly how my story would end, too." Emma smiled, a knowing, radiant smile. "And I thought mine was already written. An F and academic probation." Diane squeezed her hand. "But sometimes," she said, her voice soft with emotion, "the best stories are the ones that get rewritten." Emma leaned forward, her eyes dancing with shared history and a bright, unwritten future. "And I think," she whispered, "ours is just beginning." Diane's smile was wide, genuine, and completely unreserved. She lifted Emma's hand to her lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. The quiet office, the late afternoon sun, the hum of the university around them, it all felt like the perfect backdrop for their own beautifully rewritten ending.